Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore something really fascinating? We're going to dive into this concept called ergodicity today.
I love this topic. It's
Yeah,
so interesting, and we've got a ton of research and articles here
we're going deep.
to really help us understand how it connects to social mobility.
Exactly. It's going to challenge some assumptions, for sure. So let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What is ergodicity? It sounds kind of intimidating,
It
right?
does. It's actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Once you wrap your head around it,
It's all about how systems change over time.
right. Like think of a bowl of oatmeal.
Okay, oatmeal. I like it.
Yeah, you stir it up. Any little bit of milk or oat can end up anywhere in the bowl.
Right.
And if you keep stirring over time, they all have a pretty equal chance of being anywhere.
Okay.
That's an ergodic system. Things get totally mixed up.
So it's not just things moving around, but like the potential for anything to be anywhere.
Exactly. Given enough time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to society? Are we saying that societies are like a giant bowl of oatmeal where anyone can end up anywhere?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
Not everything's like oatmeal. Think about trying to mix oil and water.
Yeah, that's not happening.
They just separate.
Oil on top, water on the bottom, no matter what.
Right, that's a non-ergodic system.
Okay.
Things don't mix evenly over time.
Yeah.
So the question is, where do societies fall on this spectrum? Are we more like that oatmeal, or are we more like the oil and water?
Right, right. And that's what we're here to explore. Okay, so we've talked about ergodicity in the general sense,
Yes.
but you mentioned earlier that this idea really changes how we think about success and failure.
It does.
How so?
Well, think about something like income distribution. We hear a lot about the top 1%, right?
All the time.
But in a truly ergodic system, the people in that 1%, they wouldn't stay the same over time.
Okay, so you're saying that someone could be in the top 1% one year and then out the next.
Exactly. And someone else would take their place.
Well,
And it happens more often than you might think.
uh,
The research actually shows that over half the population will spend at least 1 year in the top 10% of income earners.
really?
And a quarter will even be in that top 1% at some point in their lives.
That's a lot more movement than I would imagine.
It is.
So what does this tell us about social mobility then?
It really highlights that upward and downward mobility are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
If you want to allow people to climb to the top,
Yeah.
you've got to let some fall toward the bottom.
So just like that bowl of oatmeal again, to let some rise to the top, some has to sink down.
Precisely. And our sources actually use the term skin in the game.
Okay.
The idea is that for people to have something to gain, others have to have something to lose.
I see where that might make people uncomfortable, though. It sounds a little bit ruthless.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be striving for a system where everyone rises together?
Well, it's a really complex issue. And this is where things get even more interesting. One of the sources we're looking at brings in this thought-provoking quote from Nietzsche.
Oh, Nietzsche. Okay.
He said, "Sympathy for all would be tyranny for thee."
Whoa.
Huh.
Okay, that's a pretty intense statement. What does that even mean in this context?
Well, in the context of ergodicity,
Yeah.
it suggests that if we try to prevent anyone from falling, if we cushion every downside, we might actually be hindering the potential for others to rise.
So even with good intentions, by trying to protect everyone, we might accidentally be limiting opportunities for advancement.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? It
Yeah.
really challenges us to think about the trade-offs inherent in designing any social system.
Yeah, for sure. But hold on, how does this idea of letting some people fall square with the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats?
Right.
Shouldn't economic growth benefit everyone?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
A rising tide like overall economic growth can definitely improve the lives of many people.
Yeah.
But it doesn't automatically guarantee that everyone will experience upward mobility within that system.
Yeah. So even if everyone's boat gets lifted a little, some might still be struggling at the bottom while others are sailing high above.
Exactly. Ergodicity suggests that true upward mobility requires the possibility of both rising and falling.
Okay, lots to think about here. But before we get too philosophical,
Yeah.
can you give me some real-world examples of how ergodicity plays out? What are some systems that are really ergodic, and what does that mean for the people in those systems?
Well, let's take the stock market, for example.
Okay.
It's constantly fluctuating.
Up and down all the time.
People are winning and losing all the time. New companies emerge.
Yeah,
Some become wildly successful, others fail.
right.
These are systems with a high degree of ergodicity.
So all that change creates openings for new players to enter the game and potentially rise to the top.
Exactly.
But what about systems that are less ergodic? What do those look like?
Think about industries that have huge barriers to entry,
Okay.
maybe because of strict regulations or massive startup costs.
Right.
In these cases, it's incredibly difficult for new players to break in, and it's also difficult for existing players to fall out.
So less movement, less opportunity for change.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of dynamism can have huge implications for fairness and equality. It can lead to situations where people are stuck, regardless of their talent or effort.
Hmm. Okay, so much to unpack here. We've laid out some basics of ergodicity
Yes.
and started to connect it to social mobility.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, where do we go from here? How do we use this understanding to actually create systems that are both fair and dynamic? Systems that allow for real opportunity.
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to explore in the rest of this deep dive.
All right, I'm ready for it.
Buckle up.
Let's go.
All right, so let's shift gears a bit and see how this whole idea of ergodicity plays out in different parts of our lives.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Where should we start?
Well, why don't we start with something that touches everyone?
Okay.
Education.
Educate.
Yeah, think about how this concept of things mixing and changing applies to the way we learn and the opportunities we get through education.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does ergodicity relate to getting a good education?
So imagine two different education systems.
Mm.
In the first one, students are sorted into different tracks early on
Okay.
based on how well they're doing or what their teachers think they're capable of.
Right.
And there's not much room to move between those tracks.
Mm-hmm.
You'd probably guess this is a less ergodic system.
Yeah. So if you get labeled as a gifted student early on, you stay on that path, and if you struggle early on, you're kind of stuck.
Exactly. Now picture a second system where students have the flexibility to move between levels,
Okay.
try different courses, and really discover their strengths over time.
Yeah.
This sounds a lot more like an ergodic system.
It does. It's like those students have more chances to mix it up and find where they truly belong.
Right. A more ergodic education system encourages exploration and has the potential to uncover hidden talents that might have gone unnoticed if things were more fixed.
This makes a lot of sense. It's like we're giving everyone a fair chance to rise to their full potential, even if they didn't have the best start. Can we take this beyond education, though?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Think about career paths.
Okay, yeah, careers.
How do people find their way in the working world?
I'm curious, how does this ergodicity thing show up in the world of jobs and careers?
Okay, so let's picture that classic corporate ladder.
Okay, the latter.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
kind where promotions are slow and steady.
Right.
People stay in the same role for years and years.
Yeah.
You could say that's a less ergodic system.
Definitely less opportunity to like climb quickly or try different things.
Exactly. Now
Okay.
contrast that with a more dynamic environment like the startup world we talked about earlier.
Right.
People switching roles, frequently taking on new responsibilities, even
Yeah.
jumping between companies.
Yeah, lots of movement.
That's got more ergodicity, wouldn't you say?
Totally. In that kind of setting, you have the potential to move up fast, but you also might face a higher risk of falling down.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
Ergodicity isn't just about maximizing upward mobility no matter what.
So it's not just a race to the top.
Exactly. It's more about creating systems that have room for movement for people to adjust and find the best fit for themselves, even if that means experiencing some ups and downs along the way.
I like that. It's like you're not just trying to climb any ladder, you're trying to find the right ladder for you.
You got it.
And sometimes that means being willing to climb down one ladder and try a different one.
Exactly. Ergodicity is all about embracing the fact that systems change, that things are dynamic, and that change is a natural part of finding your way.
This is really making me rethink how we often talk about fairness. It sounds like it's not just about creating fairer systems, but about making them more dynamic.
That's a great insight. And these two ideas, fairness and dynamism, are often deeply connected.
Okay.
A more dynamic system can create more genuine opportunities for people to rise or fall based on their own efforts and abilities, rather than being locked into predetermined paths.
I'm starting to see how this concept can apply to so many areas of life. But let's zoom in on one that's incredibly relevant today.
Yeah.
Wealth inequality.
Okay.
Can ergodicity help us understand the gap between the rich and the poor?
Absolutely. One way to look at it is through the lens of wealth mobility. In a truly ergodic system, people would have a much greater chance to move up or down the wealth ladder over time.
Okay, so instead of just focusing on who's rich and who's poor right now, We should also look at how wealth is distributed over people's entire lifetimes.
That's a key point.
Mhm.
And if we see a lot of movement, a lot of change in those wealth positions as people go through life, it suggests a more ergodic system.
But what if we see the same families holding on to wealth for generations? Doesn't that point to a lack of ergodicity?
You're exactly right. If wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of just a few families and stays that way generation after generation, we're looking at a much less ergodic system.
So less movement, less opportunity for others to build wealth and climb that ladder.
Precisely. And this brings us back to that idea of skin in the game we discussed earlier. If those at the top have very little to lose, it can create a system where it's much harder for others to gain.
I see how all these pieces are starting to fit together. It sounds like if we want to create a society that's more dynamic and offers more genuine equality of opportunity, we need to figure out how to make our systems more ergodic.
That's a crucial takeaway. And remember, it's not just about shifting wealth around. It's about creating more pathways for wealth mobility.
So it's less about who holds the money right now and more about who has the potential to hold it in the future.
Exactly. We need to think about how to design systems that allow for greater movement and change in how wealth is distributed over time.
This is all making a lot of sense, but I have to ask, how do we actually do that? What are some concrete steps we can take to nudge our systems towards being more ergodic?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And luckily for you, we're going to explore that in detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle that big question you left us with. How do we actually make our systems more ergodic? My brain is buzzing with all this.
Well, it's a tough question, and there's no magic bullet or one-size-fits-all answer. But when we're talking
Yeah.
about ergodicity,
Yeah,
we're really talking about creating more movement and opportunity within a system.
right.
So let's brainstorm some ideas,
Okay, love it.
keeping that in mind.
What about taxes?
Taxes.
Do
Yeah,
they have a role to play in all of this?
absolutely. Tax policies can either boost or hinder ergodicity. For example, policies that encourage investment and make it easier for people to start businesses
Okay.
can inject a lot more dynamism into the economy.
So things like lower capital gains taxes or tax breaks for entrepreneurs.
Exactly. Incentives like that can really encourage people to take risks and create new ventures,
Yeah.
which could lead to more opportunities for wealth creation and upward mobility.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about taxes on the wealthy? I hear that argument a lot, that those taxes help redistribute wealth and create more equality. How does that fit into the idea of ergodicity?
That's an important point and definitely part of the conversation.
Yeah.
But from an ergodicity perspective, the key is really about striking a balance.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just taking from the rich and giving to the poor.
Right. If tax policies are too burdensome, they can discourage investment and stifle economic growth,
Yeah.
which ultimately limits opportunities for everyone.
So we need to figure out a way to both encourage wealth creation
Yes,
and make sure those benefits are shared more widely.
exactly. It's like making the pie bigger while also making sure more people get a slice.
I love that analogy. But taxes are just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right?
What about things like education
Yeah, education is huge.
and access to opportunity more broadly?
Yeah, a good education system, one that gives everyone a solid foundation and opportunity to keep learning,
Yes,
seems pretty essential for a more ergodic society.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And it's not just about formal education either. We need to think about how people can pick up new skills and adapt to a constantly changing world.
Exactly.
So things like apprenticeships, vocational training, online courses, all of those can help people stay agile and move up.
Absolutely. And it's crucial that those opportunities are available to everyone, regardless of their income or where they live.
As you're talking, I'm starting to picture a society that's much more fluid,
Yeah.
more adaptable,
Yeah.
where people have more chances to find their place and contribute their talents.
I love that image.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, ergodicity isn't about guaranteeing that everyone will have equal outcomes.
Right.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a fair shot at reaching their full potential.
It sounds like we need systems that are both dynamic and responsive to the people in them.
Exactly. And building those kinds of systems is an ongoing process. We need to be willing to adapt and refine our approaches as we learn more.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. We've covered so much ground.
I know we have.
From oatmeal to oil and water to Nietzsche to taxes. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole concept.
It's true. Ergodicity is a powerful idea. It can help us understand how social systems work and guide us as we try to create more just and equitable societies.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I hope they'll start to view the world through an ergodic lens, to see that change is a constant,
Hmm.
that systems are always in motion, and that opportunity can often emerge from unexpected places.
That's a really inspiring message. It gives me hope that we can create a future where everyone has a chance to thrive. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, hit me.
What are some systems in your own life at work, in your community, or even in your personal relationships
Yeah.
that could benefit from a little more ergodicity? How could you introduce more dynamism and opportunity?
That's a fantastic question to leave our listeners with. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into ergodicity, and until next time.